They told me love would feel like safety, but no one warned me it could also become a cage. The moment I felt my child stir within me, the man who swore to protect me became the one I needed protection from. I remember the night everything shattered with a clarity that haunts me still. Snow fell heavy over the northern keep, blanketing the stone walls in a silence so thick it felt sacred, each flake descending like a whispered prayer from the winter sky. I had waited until the fire burned low in our chamber, until the amber light softened the hard lines of our world, to tell Cale the news. My hands trembled not from cold, but from joy I could barely contain. Joy that pressed against my ribs like wings desperate to unfold. His eyes, silver like winter moonlight reflecting off frozen lakes, searched my face as the words left my lips. I am carrying your child. For one breath, perhaps two, I saw something soft flicker in his gaze. Something that might have been wonder or tenderness, or the beginning of tears. Then it vanished like mist burned away by harsh sun, replaced by something I had never seen before in all our years together. Fear. Not the fear of a man overwhelmed by unexpected fatherhood, but the primal terror of an alpha confronting a threat he cannot control. He asked me who my family truly was. His voice had gone flat, cold as the stone beneath our feet. I told him the truth I had buried for 3 years, the secret I thought love had earned the right to keep. My brothers are Lycans, I whispered, the words tasting like confession, like surrender. The last of the Gray Mountain bloodline, guardians of the old forest. The words hung between us like smoke from a dying fire, and I watched his face harden into stone. The man I loved disappeared behind a mask I did not recognize, and in his place stood only the alpha, calculating, ruthless, afraid. By morning, I was no longer his mate. I was his prisoner. The cells beneath the northern keep were carved into the mountain itself, hollowed out by generations of hands that understood the value of darkness as a weapon. They brought me down through passages I never knew existed, past iron doors that groaned like wounded animals, through air that grew colder with each descending step. Cale did not come himself. He sent his sentinels, men whose eyes would not meet mine no matter how I searched their faces for recognition or mercy. And I understood then that shame lived in this fortress alongside fear. They gave me furs that smelled of cedar and old wool, water in a clay vessel that sweated in the cold, and a single candle that guttered and danced in the perpetual draft. When the door sealed behind them with a sound like the closing of a tomb, the darkness pressed against me like a living thing, hungry and patient and absolute. I did not scream. I did not beg. I placed my hands over my belly where new life flickered like an ember refusing to die, where my daughter dreamed her first dreams in the darkness beneath my heart. I made a vow in the silence, speaking it aloud so the stones themselves would remember. You will not be born in chains. You will not inherit your mother's cage. Somehow, some way, we will find the light again. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Time moves differently in darkness, stretching and compressing like a living thing that breathes with its own rhythm. I learned to measure it by the meals they brought, thin soup and hard bread that I ate without tasting, by the changing of guards whose footsteps echoed through stone corridors like distant heartbeats, by the growing weight of my child who seemed to gain strength even as my own body weakened. I spoke to her constantly, filling the silence with words because silence had become unbearable. I told her stories my grandmother once told me beside fires that crackled with pine sap, tales of the ancient forest where wolves ran alongside women who could hear the heartbeat of the earth itself. I told her about her uncles, 3 brothers with eyes like amber fire and hearts fierce enough to move mountains, who had raised me after our parents walked together into the spirit realm during the Great Frost when I was barely 7 winters old. I told her about the mountain where I was born, where the pines grew so tall their crowns disappeared into clouds, and the streams ran clear as glass over stones that remembered the first days of the world, And in telling her, I remembered who I was before I tried to become someone else. The Lycan blood had always been strong in me, stronger perhaps than in any of my brothers, though I had spent years denying it. As a girl, I could sense storms before they broke the horizon, feeling them as a pressure in my chest, a singing in my bones. I could hear the whispered warnings of ravens and understand the language of owls calling through twilight. I could feel the trembling of the earth when something sacred was disturbed, when the old boundaries were crossed by careless feet. But when I left the gray mountains to find my own path, determined to be more than the sum of my bloodline, I learned to silence those gifts. The world beyond the forest feared what it did not understand, and I wanted so desperately to be understood. I wanted to be loved not as a guardian or a vessel of ancient power, or the inheritor of responsibilities older than kingdoms, but simply as a woman. Kale had seemed like the answer to that longing. He was strong and certain, an alpha who commanded respect without cruelty, who spoke to me of partnership and futures built together. I let myself forget that even the gentlest cage is still a cage, that even the softest chains are still chains. Now, in the bowels of his fortress, surrounded by stone that had witnessed centuries of suffering, the power I had suppressed began to stir. It started as warmth in my chest, a slow kindling like the first spark catching dry tinder, spreading through my veins like spring melt through frozen rivers. I felt my senses sharpen day by day, the darkness becoming less absolute as my eyes adjusted in ways human eyes could never achieve. I heard conversations 3 floors above me, guards speaking of the alpha's growing paranoia, of rumors spreading through the pack like wildfire through summer grass. The alpha's mate carries cursed blood, they said. The child will be an abomination. He should have killed her when he had the chance. Another voice answered, lower, uncertain. But she has done nothing wrong. She loved him. Does that count for nothing now? The words should have broken me. Instead, they forged something new, something harder and brighter than I had ever been before. I began to reach out with senses I had long denied, stretching my awareness beyond the cell, beyond the keep, beyond the walls and wards that Kale believed could contain me. It was like learning to breathe after years of holding my breath underwater. The connection was faint at first, a thread so thin I feared a strong wind might snap it. But I followed it through the darkness, through the howling wind and the deep snow and the endless miles of winter-locked forest, until I felt them, my brothers. Alexander was the first to answer, his presence flooding my mind like sunlight breaking through storm clouds after weeks of rain. Little sister. His voice carried the weight of years and the sharp edge of barely contained rage, fury held in check by iron will alone. We felt your fear. We felt your pain. We are coming. Then came Dimitri, steadier, calmer, the strategist who always thought 3 moves ahead and 12 moves beyond that. Hold on. Do not let them break you. We are 2 days' march from the northern pass, and nothing on this earth will stop us from reaching you. And finally, Vasil, the youngest of my brothers, though still years my elder, whose gift was not strength or strategy, but something rarer and more precious. He could sense the health of any living creature, could feel the pulse of life in all its forms, and across all those miles of winter and stone. He reached for my child. She is strong, he told me, his voice thick with emotion. She burns bright, like her mother, like all the women of our line who came before. I wept then, for the first time since they locked me away. Not from despair, but from relief so profound it felt holy, felt like prayer answered and grace received. I was not alone. I had never been alone. The bonds of blood and spirit that tied me to my brothers had never broken, not through years of distance, not through silence and separation. They had only been waiting, patient as the mountains themselves, for me to remember. The guards noticed the change in me before they understood what it meant. I stopped cowering when they brought my meals, stopped pressing myself into corners and shadows. I met their eyes with a steadiness that made them look away first, their hands suddenly uncertain on their weapons. One of them, a young man with nervous hands and a face too soft for the cruelty his position demanded, lingered one evening longer than necessary. "You should not be here," he whispered through the bars, glancing over his shoulder at the empty corridor. "This is wrong. What the Alpha is doing is wrong. There are others who think so too, but we are afraid." I asked him his name. "Brennan," he said, and I heard the tremor of hope beneath the fear. I told him that when my brothers came, I would remember his kindness. His face went pale as fresh snow, and I knew then that word of the Lycans had already reached the keep, carried on winds of rumor and dread. Kyle came to see me 3 nights later. He stood outside my cell with a torch that threw dancing shadows across his face, and I saw how much he had aged in such a short time. The silver in his hair had spread like frost creeping across a window, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man at war with himself, losing on every front. "I loved you," he said, and his voice broke on the words like ice breaking under sudden weight. "I still love you, but I cannot let that child live. Do you understand what it will become? A Lycan with alpha blood, a creature that could command both wolf and man, that could tear apart everything I have built, everything my father built before me." I rose from the furs where I had been resting, my body heavy with child but my spirit light as air, and walked to the bars that separated us. I placed my hands where his gripped the iron, felt the warmth of his skin, felt him flinch at my touch as though it burned. "You speak of what she might become," I told him, my voice soft as falling snow. "But you have already become the monster you fear." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing up the stone corridors, and I knew that whatever happened next, there would be no mercy from him. The man I had loved was gone, consumed by fear, and only the Alpha remained. The attack came at dawn on the 7th day. I felt my brothers before I heard them, their presence blazing at the edge of my awareness like 3 suns rising over the mountains, like forest fire racing toward the sky. The keep shook with the force of their arrival, stones groaning in their ancient mortar, and even in my cell deep beneath the earth, I heard the screams begin. Lycan fury is not like the rage of ordinary wolves, not like the anger of men or the savagery of beasts. It is older, deeper, a force of nature that cannot be reasoned with or resisted, that exists beyond the boundaries of what most creatures understand as possible. My brothers had not come with armies or allies. They had come alone, 3 guardians of the ancient forest, 3 sons of the Gray Mountain, and that was more than enough. Brennan was the one who unlocked my cell. His hands shook so badly he could barely work the key in the frozen lock, and there was blood on his face that I did not think was his own. "We need to go," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Now. Before the Alpha realizes you are free. Before anyone thinks to check the cells." I followed him through corridors that had become chaos, past guards who were too busy fleeing or fighting to notice one pregnant woman and her unlikely rescuer, past fallen stone and broken doors, and the marks of claws that had torn through iron like cloth. The sounds of battle grew louder as we climbed, snarls and howls, and the crash of stone giving way to something more powerful than stone had ever been built to contain. We emerged into the great hall just as Alexander brought down the last of Kale's sentinels. My eldest brother stood in the center of the destruction, his massive form caught between man and wolf in that terrible, beautiful space where Lycan power dwells, his amber eyes burning with protective fury that seemed to light the very air around him. Blood matted his silver fur, some his own, most belonging to those who had stood between him and his purpose. When he saw me, something shifted in his face, the rage giving way to relief so raw it made my heart clench like a fist around an arrow. He crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, his transformation receding as he moved, and gathered me into arms that trembled with emotion he would never speak aloud. "You are safe," he said against my hair, his voice rough as broken stone. "You are safe now. We have you. We will always have you." Dmitri and Vasil flanked us within moments, their own transformations receding as the immediate threat faded into the background of broken bodies and shattered stone. Vasil pressed his hand to my belly immediately, his eyes closing as he assessed what grew within, his gift reaching through flesh and bone to touch the spirit that waited there. "She is well," he confirmed, and a smile broke across his face like sun through clouds. "Strong. Ready to fight already, I think. Despite everything, despite the destruction and the blood and the long, terrible days of darkness." I laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the ruined hall, foreign and familiar at once. Then Kale emerged from the shadows. He was wounded, his left arm hanging useless at his side where Dimitri's claws had torn through muscle and sinew, but he still held a blade in his right hand. The silver of it caught the torchlight, gleaming with the cold promise of death, and I knew with sick certainty that it was meant for me, for our daughter, for the threat he had convinced himself we represented. My brothers moved to intercept him, growls rising in their throats, but I stepped forward first. This was my battle to end. This was my cage to break. I looked at the man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my secrets and my future and my heart, and I felt the last chains of that old love fall away like autumn leaves finally released by the trees that bore them. "You wanted to know what our daughter would become," I said, my voice steady as the mountain where I was born. "Let me show you what her mother already is." The power rose through me like a tide, like the forest itself awakening after a long winter of sleep and silence. I did not transform as my brothers did, for my gift had always been different, had always walked a different path. I was not a warrior. I was a guardian, a keeper of the old bonds between human and wild, a voice that could speak the language of wolves and be answered. I called to the wolves of the northern keep, the ones Kale had bred for war and kept in chains of their own, prisoners as surely as I had been. I called to the wild ones in the forests beyond the walls, the packs that had lived in these mountains since before humans raised their first stones. I called to the ancient spirits that slumbered in the earth and the wind and the deep places where light never reached, the old powers that remembered when the world was young. And they answered. The great doors of the hall burst open with a sound like thunder, and wolves poured through like a silver flood, like moonlight given form and purpose. They did not attack. They simply stood, dozens upon dozens of them, their eyes fixed on the alpha who had thought himself their master, who had believed dominion was the same as bond. Kale's blade clattered to the floor, the sound of metal on stone impossibly loud in the sudden silence. He fell to his knees, and for the first time in all the years I had known him, I saw him truly afraid. Not afraid of death, afraid of understanding, afraid of seeing at last what he had become. I could have killed him. My brothers expected it, their eyes bright with the anticipation of justice finally served, and perhaps he deserved it. But as I stood there with my daughter stirring beneath my heart and the power of generations humming in my blood like a song that had never stopped playing, I understood that death was not the lesson he needed to learn. Some lessons can only be taught by living. "You will live," I told him, and my voice carried the weight of prophecy, of promise, of power older than his line or his ambitions. "You will live with the knowledge of what you almost destroyed. You will tell your pack what happens when fear governs instead of wisdom, when love is caged instead of cherished. And if you ever threaten my family again, if you ever raise your hand against any creature under my protection, the wolves will remember. They always remember." I turned my back on him then and walked out of the northern keep between my brothers, leaving behind the ruins of a life I had tried to build on a foundation of denial. The wolves parted before us like water around stones, and as we passed through the gates into the cold, clean air of dawn, they followed. Every wolf in the fortress, every wild hunter from the surrounding woods, they all followed me into the snow-covered morning, The journey home took many days, through mountain passes choked with snow and valleys where the wind cut like knives, but I was not tired. I was awake, truly awake, for the first time in years. My brothers told me stories as we walked, memories of our childhood that made me laugh and weep in equal measure, news of the gray mountains and the changes that had come in my absence, plans for the future that stretched before us like an endless road. The wolves ranged around us like a living shield, their presence a constant comfort, and at night they pressed close to keep me warm while stars wheeled overhead in patterns our grandmother had taught us to read. Vasil monitored my daughter constantly, marveling at how she grew stronger with each passing day. "She knows she is safe now," he said one evening as the fire crackled and the wolves sang to the rising moon. "She knows she is coming home." We reached the gray mountains on the first day of the spring thaw. The snow was beginning to recede from the lower slopes, revealing the dark earth beneath, and the air smelled of pine and wet earth and the promise of new growth. As we climbed the familiar paths toward the village where I was born, I felt my grandmother's presence brush against my awareness. A gentle touch from beyond the veil, warm as summer sunlight. "You have become who you were meant to be," her voice whispered. "I am proud of you, little guardian." My daughter was born under the full moon of early spring, in the sacred grove where generations of our family had taken their first breaths. The ancient trees stood witness as they had for centuries uncounted, their branches heavy with new buds that seemed to glow in the silver light. My brothers stood watch at the edge of the clearing while the village midwife guided me through the final hours of labor, her hands gentle and sure, her voice a steady anchor through the waves of pain and joy. The wolves formed a circle beyond the trees, their howls rising to greet the child who would one day lead them, who carried in her blood the promise of the old world and the hope of the new. And when I finally held her in my arms, when I looked into her eyes that shone amber like autumn fire, like sunrise over mountains, I knew that every moment of suffering had led to this perfect joy. I named her Alina, meaning light, because she had illuminated the path back to myself. The years that followed were not always easy. There were those who challenged our right to guide the packs, who tested the peace we had forged. But my brothers stood beside me through every challenge. And my daughter grew into her power with a grace that left me breathless. She ran with the wolves before she could walk with humans, her laughter echoing through the forest like bells. By her 5th year, she could speak to them as easily as I could. The bond between our family and the wild creatures deepened with each season, as it had for centuries before us. I never saw Kale again. Word reached us that he had dissolved his pack and retreated to the far edges of the territory, a broken man haunted by the consequences of his choices. I did not hate him. He had been a chapter in my story, a dark passage that led me to brighter places, but he was not my ending. My ending, my true ending, is still being written. It is written in the laughter of my daughter as she races through the snow with wolves at her heels. It is written in the quiet pride of my brothers as they watch over our family. It is written in the forest itself, in every tree and stone and stream that knows my name. They told me love would feel like safety. They were wrong. Love feels like freedom. Love feels like coming home after a long journey through darkness. Love feels like the first howl of a newborn wolf greeting the moon that will guide her all her life. And I, who once thought I needed to choose between the woman I wanted to be and the guardian I was born to become, have learned that they were always the same person. I am mother and protector, healer and hunter, vessel of ancient power and simply a woman who loves her family. This is my story. This is my truth, and it belongs to no one but me.